Hello, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on when you're listening to this, and welcome to the Victory Podcast. This is your host, Monique Watson, and thanks for joining me. So, on today's episode 11, we have Vanda and Frank Favaro from Calgary, and I sat down with them to kind of talk a little bit about marriage. They've been married for over 25 years. They don't call themselves experts, as you'll hear in the interview, but just other folks that have been able to have a successful marriage for the last 25 plus years, and have some great tips and tricks for those who are married, interested in becoming married, or out there looking for that special someone. So I hope you enjoy. All right, so thank you for joining us. This is the Victory Podcast, and I'm your host, Monique Watson. And today I have Vanda and Frank Favaro, who are going to talk a little bit about marriage and relationships. Thanks for joining, Vanda and Frank.
Thank you for having us. I find it funny. I'm glad you didn't call us experts or anything, because, it's like anyone else that's swimming in the pool. We're just kind of thrown in and doing our best to not drown.
Absolutely. So maybe you can tell our listeners, I know those who are avid listeners know Vanda's lovely voice already, but maybe you can tell a little bit about yourselves and maybe how you all got to know me, the lovely human being hosting this podcast.
Okay, well, I'll go first because I'm Frank's connection to Monique, obviously, yes. Right? Okay, well, my name is Vanda. You pronounced the last name right, which is great.
Oh, yay. I was worried about that. I was like, I think I know how to pronounce it, but we'll find out.
Frank and I both said it two different ways in our wedding vows. So maybe that's a story for a little later, but he pronounced his last name differently than I pronounced our last name. So in our wedding vows. So anyway.
Married to him then? Are you married to someone else?
Well, that's another story.
Sure. Yeah. That's why we've been together for 25 years.
So my name's Vanda. I am a Canadian born in sort of central Canada, Ontario area, now living in Calgary, which is the Great West, near Banff, the Rockies, if anyone has come here for travel and things. And I met Monique at work. You ended up getting sort of a placement position here in Canada, in Calgary. That's how we met. I'm always interested in meeting people with different backgrounds. And so with your Southern drawl, which I'm sure you don't even think you have, but you totally
don't compared to other people.
Compared to other people I know.
Out is when it really shows itself. It's when a y'all comes out. That's usually how people can tell.
No, exactly. And we worked for a company that had Texans and lots of other people working there too. So there was a little bit of that there anyway, but so that's how we met. How many years ago was that? 5 or something?
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh my God, 5 years ago. Yeah, because we moved there in January, 5.5 now, because we moved there first week of January 2015. So yeah.
Yeah. And I just, like I said, we ended up working in the same department and just kind of hit it off. We took Frank and I took you and Christian to Banff and to the mountains because you hadn't been there yet because you didn't have a car. Which Calgary's, it's close to Banff in the Rockies, but you still need a car or some way to get there. So we kind of offered to take you guys, and that was kind of, I think, where it all kind of. And then Christian had an even greater Southern accent drawl. I just loved it. So it was. I guess that's kind of how we, I think, hit it off. And now we're on each other's podcasts just as an excuse to keep in touch.
Awesome. Frank?
All right, Frank.
All right. Well, I grew up in Northern Ontario in a small town called Sudbury, Ontario. And I grew up there until I was, 25, 26. Yeah. And then I got married to this lovely woman next to me. And I guess we were 24 years old, right? When we got married at 24. And then this lovely woman next to me, we have spent My dog's growling.
The dogs are growling because they know he's lying. No.
and
It's a
and
lie
then
detector.
yeah, exactly. So then we moved out to Calgary, Alberta, close to about 21 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've been here ever since. And same thing, we just enjoy being out here, and yeah, no, it's good. And then I guess I met you through Vanda, so it was through Vanda's work. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Now neither of us work in that same place anymore, and
Right.
yeah.
But still, the friendship continues.
Well,
So
yeah,
that's
like
good.
we're friends in spite of that place. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's talk a little bit about how you all met each other. How the Favaros came to be the Favaros. Maybe you can give us a little, whoever wants to answer, or maybe there's two versions of the story.
Well, we knew each other from high school. We were kind of in the same, I guess, stratosphere of friends. We had kind of similar friends, same friends. So we kind of went to high school together, but we didn't really connect until after high school. I kind of relate that I didn't really like Vanda at the time, and it wasn't because of her. It was because some of the friends she hung around I didn't really like too much. So I never, really thought that we would get together over time. So yeah, I didn't really like Vanda at the time, I guess.
All
Yeah,
right.
no, he completely judged me by my friends, and my friends were my cousins, and so you know how you have those people you choose and you bring into your life, and then you have people that you're kind of like, hey, we just always been around each other, so we stick around together. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anyway, so we were we were great girls. We never got into trouble. Like, I don't know what Frank was a little judgmental, I think. But anyway, uh yeah, no.
Frank? No.
Frank was also a year ahead of me in school. We just we connected a little bit through friends and things like that. I always thought he was just very kind. He was always my mom remembers me coming home and saying, this Frank guy whose last name I can't pronounce, he's a really nice guy. Like, he was so different than 17-year-old guys at that time who were so stupid. And he was just always kind and polite, and yeah. So he stood out to me in that sense. And so I didn't pursue him dating wise or anything like that. I didn't really date in high school. But yeah, and then after we were out of high school, we ended up at the same party together.
Yep.
And you asked me to dance, or somehow, yeah. And then yeah, we kind of ended up dating. Kind of, I think he kind of realized, like, he couldn't just judge me by a couple of other people I hung around with, but kind of got to know me. And
yes, yeah.
But who you are at 17, it just changes. Even to 19 and 20, it changes so rapidly once you kind of get out of high school and start kind of your life, on your own and stuff. It just, you change a lot. So yeah.
Yeah. One of the things is when we got to know each other, I did change my opinion, obviously, but it was after 25 years. After 25 years, I hope so. But I changed my opinion just because she was not. Yeah, I kind of judged her unfairly. She was very kind, and we hit it off right away, and we had very similar likes and dislikes. So I think that's where it started.
Yeah.
Awesome. And now, like you said, 25 years later. Does it feel like 25? Does it feel like 45? Does it feel like 5? How's it feel 25 years?
Yeah, there's a weird point around like 7 or 9 or 10 years where you don't have any stories from before you were married. Like, you start where all the stories that you tell about things are from when you were married. It's kind of a weird thing that happens. You kind of realize, oh, I'm not telling stories from my, teenage years or my whatever, early 20s. Mind you, we got married quite young, right? But
how old were y'all?
So I was 22. You were 24?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and I was almost 23. So yeah, definitely young.
It's closer to. That's like how my. I think. Let's see. close to how my parents were. They got married in June of 84. So they were both 23 because they both have a birthday in the same month. So,
Yeah.
But yeah. And so, yeah, so 25 years. What is if there's one, I don't know if there's one singular, like, big challenge that you've overcome or anything, or just some things in general about, fights or disagreements, and any tips about those?
Frank, what do you got?
Well,
I've got a list, but I don't want to talk the whole time.
While you talking, that you two maybe give just one, and not 12.
I would say early on, like Frank and I connected, and we had so much in common, and we got along so well. But it was very weird how different our upbringings were and our background. Like, yeah, like we're both, I mean, I wasn't raised necessarily in Sudbury, but I had been there since I was born there, and then moved away, and then moved back. Anyway, even though we're both Canadian born, and Frank's family is Italian. His parents were born in Italy. His brother and sister were born in Italy. He's kind of the only one in this family born in Canada. So his upbringing was more of that traditional Italian upbringing. Mine was much more, I don't know what you would call it. Like, my parents just always, my parents were kind of like, okay, we trust you until you show us we can't trust you. Whereas, and I'm speaking for your family, sorry, Frank, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it's almost more of like, we don't trust ourselves to trust you. We kind of want to make sure we're watching everything, if that makes sense. And it's not necessarily they don't trust their kids. They just don't trust situations and things like that.
Yeah, I think
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think part of that was maybe their upbringing and stuff, that they kind of were very young and kind of did things that they maybe regretted. So they looked at their kids in the same way. They didn't want them to make the same mistakes they made. So I think they were overprotective on some of the things that some of the things that they didn't let us do, and so they were kind of strict in that terms, in terms of letting us do different things and experience different things.
So sorry. My point for that was just one of the early challenges for me was I was trying to treat Frank's parents like I treat my parents, which are more really like friends at this point. Like, once I was on my own, lived on my own, and then once I was married, it was kind of like my parents were my friends. Yeah, I could go to them for advice, but we were much more, I don't know, it was just different. So I would try to treat Frank's parents the same way, but they would then worry. So if I said something like, hey, we're thinking about buying a car, then it became that they kind of were concerned what kind of car we're going to buy, were we going to get in over our heads financially and things like that. Whereas my parents would be like, oh, let us know if you want. Oh, my dad would say, oh, I'd love to look at cars if you want to bring me, but you don't have to. Or, oh, you should check this place. Like, it was just a very different thing. And so I kind of learned early on, because I made them maybe kind of worry when they shouldn't have had to. And anyway, so from the beginning, I kind of learned, okay, Frank kind of deals with manages his parents, and I kind of deal with mine, if that makes sense. Like, it even setting up and arranging visits and holidays and things like that, like, I let Frank do that with his family, because if I try to do it, it's almost like I don't know. It's just a different kind of relationship. Like, they're still very parental, even now that we're in our 40s. Whereas my parents, it's much more like peers. I don't know. Does that make sense?
To me, it does. Yes.
So that was a bit of a challenge.
So.
Yeah, that was a bit of a challenge. I got in trouble a few times for, anyway, not approaching things. Ways that they thought like it's respectful to do it this way, and I didn't do it that way because I didn't have that parental thing with my parents, if that makes sense. So I kind of, a lot of it was my misunderstanding and maybe them a little bit overreacting. So that was kind of an early challenge, I would say, that then we kind of solved. Do you have one?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges too was in terms of marriage is, when sometimes you have to work too much, that puts a strain in marriage. I had a job where I had to work, and I was working 60 or 70 hours a week, and it was just too much. Yeah, it was just too much, and I wasn't seeing Vanda very much, and then that's where the problems start, and then trying to make time for Vanda. sometimes, we focus too much in our careers and on doing things for our careers and stuff. And then you have to find out what's really important. So that's where putting work-life balance in perspective, right? So that's where, you have to determine what you and that problem with the job working 60 or 70 hours, that ended up that job was just an awful job, and it didn't, the promises that it gave, that there would be promotions, you would climb up the corporate ladder, that didn't happen, right? So it basically kind of taught me a valuable lesson is, okay, I can spend my time doing this to try to better the family by providing materially, by providing things, or it would be better just to spend time with the family. And the money thing, yeah, it's basically, instead of living to work to live, basically.
Right, right. No, absolutely. That makes sense. It's definitely good advice. Go ahead.
Many people have, I call it sacrificing your marriage or sacrificing a relationship with your children. Many people sacrifice that on the altar of work. Like lots and lots of people have done it. And you just have to define what success is for you, and then work and live to honor that, what you define as success. And and it's not always climbing the corporate ladder. That's not something we ever set out to do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it's challenging, especially I know I'm in my mind planning for the future and things I want to do career-wise, and then things we want to do with future children, not pregnant, to be clear, listeners. Always gotta, anytime you say the word children, it's like, no, they're not here, they're not coming, they're not on the horizon, not today. But yeah, it's definitely can be very challenging. Is there other advice that you would have for people who are let's say people who are looking to be married or looking for their spouse? What is maybe some advice, and then what are maybe some tips for keeping things, I don't want to say keeping things fresh, but keeping each other like interested isn't quite the word, but staying kind of keeping engaged in your marriage, so to say. Maybe some tips there.
So I think I can talk about that, because my tip actually leads to something that you should look for in a marriage mate. It's really something that you should look for is you got to like the same stuff. I think that's very important. You should have common interests, like the same type of things, because that's going to help you later on in the marriage, right? A lot of people, they feel like, when they get married, they grow apart. Well, I find that if you like the same thing, if you have the same interest, what'll happen is you kind of grow together when you get married. So if I were to say, find somebody that likes the same things that you do. Not to say that you can't have different interests. I think that's important as well. But when you like the same things, that really helps. Just to kind of get over some of the little humps and stuff, because you spend time doing the same things together. And I think that's the most important thing, is when you spend time together, similar interests, that's what helps to make the marriage continue. And in terms of, as the marriage continues on, you have to, continue to change together. Like, people grow apart. They say they grow apart is because they kind of start to develop different interests, right? Well, why not develop those different interests, but involve each other in those interests? For example, when we got married early on, Vanda, liked to go, and it sounds like something that's you see in sitcoms. She liked to go to ballet. I've never been to the ballet, so so I could have said, okay, well, I don't like it, even though I wasn't familiar or didn't know anything about the ballet. But I went and I enjoyed it. And so not that now I'm a ballet fan, but if Vanda wants to go to ballet, I don't mind. And that's where you have those differences, but you kind of have to do things together. So you have these differences, but to take an interest in those differences, and I think that helps the marriage quite a bit, and that helps to keep it fresh, because you're always because in a marriage, you're always changing. You're always growing, hopefully. You're always, into different things as the marriage goes along. So if you guys can, if you can navigate it together, and even if there's differences, if you can respect those differences and even share in those differences, that's going to help a lot.
Yeah, because I would say, to go along with that, Frank has always been huge into sports, and we liked sports as a family growing up. We watched CFL, Canadian Football League, football. We watch hockey, of course, because we're Canadians. Like, we're not animals. And so, but sports definitely wasn't as much of an interest as it is to Frank, and has always been to Frank. So, but when we got married, then I definitely, we threw Super Bowl parties, and I would sort of try to show interest in the Dallas Cowboys. It's very hard to do.
I concur.
As you know.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like 3.5 years ago, when I started a sports podcast, as basically it's like I'm the spouse of a sports fan, and I started a sports podcast kind of for people like me that were like, hey, sports is part of our lives. It just is. Let's talk about the stuff we like about sports. That's kind of the idea of my podcast. So that actually was an interest of mine, doing the creative side of the podcast. The fact that the topic was sports obviously brings Frank into it as well. He's been my guest co-host multiple times and things like that. I'll just wait for this thing to pass by here, maybe. Okay, it's right next door. Yeah, so then, of course, that was kind of almost combining our interest in a sense. And I've learned now we can talk sports way better than we have for like 20 years of our marriage, because I do research and I do a podcast on it, and I'm always looking for interesting things to talk about. So, you're gonna change, and you have to be willing to let each other change and grow with those interests. If someone, we used to always take vacations in cities. Like, we always went to cities. We loved going to like cities. That was our favorite vacation, and music festivals. And then you get to a point where you're like, I really need to rest and relax on vacation. And so our vacation totally switched, and to the point now that we're on vacation this week, and we're out at our, basically our campsite, our seasonal campsite with our trailer, and just hanging out, kind of building fires and making grilled cheese sandwich. Very, very different from previous vacations. But as things change, we haven't forced each other to stick in those things. We've kind of gone along and worked with each other.
Awesome. No, that's important to kind of grow in that way together, like Frank and both of you are kind of saying. Awesome. That's fantastic. I think it's really encouraging to meet couples and get to know couples like yourselves who have been together for a while, because I feel like there's less and less of that in some ways, or at least that's shown in settings, and then also getting an opportunity to really sit down and kind of examine those things. What's the one thing, and I don't think I put this on the outline, but what would you say was one thing that maybe surprised you about being married over the course of your marriage, or at the beginning, about each other, or like marriage, the idea of marriage itself?
I guess, like, I was so much more mature when I was like 19 to 22 than I am now, I feel like. But I remember planning our wedding, and we just kept constantly reminding each other, this is just one day. Like, it's going to be a really fun day. We're going to have a great time, hopefully. The food will be great. But we always knew that the wedding was just, like, if that was the best day of our marriage, that's really sad. So we always kind of knew that would be a good day and a good memorable day, and it definitely is. And people still actually tell us they remember being at our wedding and how much fun we had. And I think it's because we really didn't put a lot of pressure on that day. We had a big wedding, sit down dinner, like, 200 and almost 300 people, sit down dinner at a hotel. Like, it was a nice fancy wedding, but we went into it very much like, this won't be the best day ever. So we kind of knew that. And then when we went into marriage, we've had different people warn us the first year is difficult and the first that's done. So we kept kind of waiting for this difficult time that kind of didn't come. And, like, I don't know. I mean, I made a couple of rules for myself when I went into marriage. One of them was my family has a very hard time apologizing. We don't like to, we don't like to admit we're wrong. So I knew that was a weakness, a fault in me. And so I said from the beginning, I was like, okay, you have to apologize and apologize quickly and mean it in marriage. Because this is not like your brothers who are stuck with you and have to love you anyway because they're your brothers. This is someone that's deciding to be with you. So you kind of have to, do your best to be a better person. So anyway, so I learned to say I'm sorry and to admit that I was wrong when I was. And I kind of knew that from the start. The other thing, my goal, and this sounds like such a minimal goal, but it was always when I call Frank and he knows it's me calling, I want him to answer the phone and be happy that it's me. So I know that sounds like very strange, but I knew so many friends that got married before me, and it was, if they phoned their husband, maybe it was to nag them or to tell them they forgot something or to remind them, like, and it was all maybe like nagging sort of, where, or you see it on TV and movies, right? Oh, it's the ball and chain calling, or it's the wife, And I always thought, I want Frank to, when he answers the phone, to be like, oh, great, Vanda's calling me. This is going to be a great conversation because it's her, as opposed to like dreading, like, okay, what did I mess up this time? Not that I don't nag. I think like it kind of, you can't help but do that when you're someone. Anyways, I'm always working on things too for myself. But yeah, and so I think that was achieved in that, he always answers the phone when I call, so that's a good sign.
Well, and for me, it was something very similar to that. Is that when I used to go when I go with friends and stuff that are married, I was always surprised that they wanted to stay out longer, and they didn't want to go home to their wives, and I always felt that was a surprise because I always felt like, oh, I can't wait to get this night over with my friends so I can go home, and spend time with my wife and stuff. So. And not to brag or anything, but that's what I always felt like. Yeah, and I couldn't understand why people would complain about their wives as well, because I have never complained about Vanda publicly. Sometimes under my breath I will say some things, but publicly I've never complained. And I'd see these guys that we complain about their wives, and I'd be like, well, your wife's not that bad, like like. And it's so I always found it a surprise that people would complain about their wives. So
yeah, I feel that way. I'm of the mind like you shouldn't air your dirty laundry, as the saying goes, with other people. Like if you're having an issue with your spouse,
yes,
it's just I don't feel like that needs to be on Front Street. It's one thing to talk to like a therapist or someone in that realm, or whatever, if that's necessary or whatever. But I don't know. I'm just like keep things close to the vest. I mean, fun stuff. Yeah. Like, oh, we're doing this and, whatever. But if you're having issues, especially to like in-laws or family members and stuff, because they, you as a couple, someone told me this, like you as a couple get over, problem A happens. Y'all have a little tiff or an issue for a couple days. And then, day 3, y'all are over it. We're all good. But on day 2, you told, all your cousins and all of them. So now every time they see him, the last thing they heard was this, and that. So it's good to kind of keep those things close to the vest.
And that's another, never tell your parents if you guys had an argument. Never, because it'll be brought up 20 years later.
My goodness. Yeah, true. Yeah.
Your parents aren't like an unbiased, most people would think that it would be like, oh, your parents would always side with you, but my mom would always side with Frank, or would always like, not that I would complain to her, but in talking in anything, it was always like, oh, well, you should let Frank, or you should, Frank should, you know, maybe Frank needs a break, like my mom really thinks the world of Frank. And so that's a great thing. But yeah, she one time said, like, I hope you guys have kids and I hope they look like Frank. And I'm like,
What does that even
what does, like, how is that? Like, it's, and she said, oh,
I'm your child.
dark curly hair, dark eyes. And I'm like, okay, sure. I mean, we never planned on having children, and that was like from seriously day one of dating. I was very open with the fact that I wasn't interested at this point in having kids, and so that's never been kind of that's a whole nother side of relationships or marriage that you could talk to someone about kids, because I like that has never been like the pressures of raising kids, but also like the joys of raising kids. We haven't experienced either of those things, so you'd have to talk to someone else about that. But for us, I mean, well, and that's another thing to go into a marriage is make sure you agree on major things like having children, where you're gonna live, what economic level you're interested in living at. You know what I mean? Like if someone's content with less and someone else really just wants more and wants to live in this certain community or things like that, like you have to make sure that you're both pulling in the same direction, because that's going to help. So in terms of kids, I mean, I knew from high school age that I wasn't interested in having kids. I love kids. I love our nephews and our niece. Like, it's fantastic. That's a great relationship. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, I get it. I get why people want kids. But anyways, those big life decisions, you cannot compromise on those, because you will not be happy. Like, you cannot be happy. Not that someone can't change their mind, but going into it, you just have to be really honest and open and make sure you're both, like, if you're on the same like horse team or sled dogs if you're in Canada, I guess, make sure you're pulling in the same direction, because otherwise, like, all your efforts are wasted if you're pulling against each other as opposed to together. You can accomplish so much more.
True. Sled dogs are going to be now in my dreams tonight because we talked about it. Just because. Okay. So that was really good information, I think, for people, and I think useful for a lot of couples out there. So how can folks find, I know you talked a bit about your podcast. I don't know if you want to plug it a little bit, and how folks can find you all on social media if you want them to find you. If you're like my husband, you want to stay incognito and all that.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to find me, so I won't say anything.
Frank barely has social media. Frank barely has social media, and I have 4 Instagram accounts.
Yes.
And someone
those are one of the differences about us that we have to grow to like about each other.
But one day someone said to Frank, "Oh, I love your dog's Instagram account." And Frank turns to me and he goes, "Our dog has an Instagram account?" And I was like, I didn't think you were interested, so I didn't tell you, but I just started it. So anyway, so the podcast is, and again, it's very casual sports chat. I call it a sports podcast for the rest of us, and it's called Tight Ends Podcast.
Your award-winning podcast, was that?
Yes. Yeah, so I did. I won a Canadian podcast award.
She's very humble about it, but I told her, say it every time you say that you have a podcast. It should be award-winning podcast, right out of your mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I know I did win a Canadian podcast award. Tight Ends Podcast. So you can find it. The website is tightendspodcast.com. That's the best place to go to find everything. And my favorite social media is Twitter at the Tight Ends. And we talk about funny stuff in sports and bad boys and things. The last episode Monique was on, definitely the heaviest episode I've ever done. I think it's the only episode I've cried in, I think. Just because we kind of talked about sports. Yeah, sports and kind of how it's being affected now with, things going on. Black Lives Matter and different things going on around, and of course it affects sports, because sports is part of our, social construct. So, so for the most part, it's very funny. And the last episode is the only one that, last episode is also fun, but it just kind of gets a little more heavy. But yeah, so find it and enjoy. And yeah, football is supposed to be starting again in September. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Vanda and Frank, for joining me. And yeah, have a good rest of your day.
All right, thank you.
All right.
All
Thanks.
right. So, once again, I'd like to thank Vanda and Frank for joining me on this interview, and I think with some really good tips and information. Hopefully, this will help you in your relationships, or if you're looking into getting into a relationship, something to consider. Thanks again for listening to the Victory Podcast. You can find us wherever you find your podcast. Please be sure to share this with your friends, family, even your enemies. And I hope to find you also on social media. You can find us at The Victory Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So please leave comments. You can also check out our website at thevictorypodcast.com. Lots of good updates there. And I'll end this episode, as I end every other episode, with my tagline of every problem has a solution. It's whether you're willing to do the work to find it. Let's do the work and be victorious.